Yeah, today. And so I asked that again. Since there are so many, and we are under a little bit of a tight schedule, that if you could just drop your name and your jurisdiction into the chat, especially if you're new, we would love to make sure that we recognize you, and then other people in the network can also reach out to you and keep the conversation going. So on that, I just want to also say, just as a quick introduction, in August, we talked about strategic planning implementation strategies. So we were talking on the front end, a lot of those kinds of conversations. And now for today, we're going to take that conversation to really the next step. We're going to still talk about implementation a little bit, but we're also going to talk about during, and then the real focus is going to be after the performance evaluation. When we did the rollout and we asked for your feedback on what areas we needed to focus on, that was one of the questions, saying, especially now, we are so focused on moving from one project or one process or one strategic initiative to the next. And it's very hard to breathe between those, let alone take the time to actually look back onto what we did and actually make decisions based off of whether or not they were successful or not. And again, just anecdotally, there have been times where I've heard, an organization say, well, we got time to review, but 3 or 4 steps too far to actually then make change. The train's already left the station now. So today we actually I think we have 2 fantastic speakers with us to provide their perspective and their long careers in this type of work to talk about, again, the performance evaluation strategies within 2 different types of program, 2 different size jurisdictions. First and foremost, we have one of our own local people with us, Mark Collins from the town of Wendell. He's going to be, he's the town manager of the town of Wendell. He's going to be speaking with us first, and then we're going to pivot over to Lawrence Pollock, who is the budget director for the city of Fort Collins in Colorado, to give us more of a national kind of perspective, a little bit outside of our region, obviously just a little bit down the road. And one last thing before I turn it over to you, Mark, I wanted to just mention that we do have a little more time today. So please ask questions, make sure we're going to be monitoring it. We're going to make sure that we have a little more than the 30-minute time allotment that we normally have. We really want to have a great, robust conversation with these 2 experts. So that being said, Mark, I'm going to throw it over to you if you want to go ahead and share your screen and kick us off.
Thanks, Matt. My staff that are on the call know that trusting me with technology is dangerous, so let's give this a try. All right.
Perfect.
Excellent. And then I can do that. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Matt said, my name's Mark Collins. You get asked to do more of these talks when you get old, is what I'm learning. So I appreciate for my acknowledgement of age. And I will get started a little bit. Make sure it's going to switch screens for me. It's not transitioning screen. There we go. All right. So the longer I do this, what I realize most is I don't know that much. The higher up I get in management, the more experience I have, the more I rely on other people and have to build trust in other people to do things and less rely on my own abilities. When you get into strategic planning and performance management, that's definitely the case. It's an all hands in a lot of different ways. And it's been a winding path for me personally to get to this realization. For me in Catawba County, North Carolina, I worked for a manager named Tom Lundy, who back in the 80s, early 90s started developing a reinventing government process that tied performance measures to budget saving. So different divisions and departments, not all, but some were characterized for this process. And if you saved money through process and efficiency, you would split the benefit at the end of the fiscal year between the general fund reserve and then crediting your project, your budget to be able to do things that were kind of outside the budget. So if we were able to save money through an innovation in how we build park benches locally versus mail order, we could use that savings to buy a small tractor at the end of the fiscal year. So there was an efficiency tied to the performance management. Burke County taught me a lot about dealing with change when you get into a strategic plan. I was hired a week or two before 9/11 by Burke County as a county planner, and my role coming in was to get the community surveys back that they had just mailed out for their strategic planning process and help through the strategic planning process. And 9/11 happened, so you can imagine how the responses changed in a community survey before, whether someone filled it out before or after 9/11. So understanding that the world happens despite your best intent as you go through this. Fort Myers, Florida, as a young assistant city manager, really dealing with connecting strategic planning to customer relations management to build community trust, transitioning from a strong mayor form of government to a council manager form of government in that location. Williamsburg, Virginia was a phenomenal opportunity. There about 3 years. They had very strong established strategic planning and performance management. But one thing you have to be cognizant of, I mean, that community is only about 16,000 people within the city. Half of those are William and Mary College students, so not a large organization. And they had 3 different performance management systems in addition to a very strong strategic planning process. And it was overwhelming staff. So learned a lot about right sizing performance management for your jurisdiction in that process. And now in Wendell, North Carolina, dealing with a community that's transitioning from a small town, relationship driven organization to more of a professional, data driven organization as it grows. But you know, if you look at who was the performance management team in Wendell, it's me. And then having to hire on staff, a couple of which are on the call today, to really be able to advance this in the past year. So when you can't look at performance management and strategic planning separately, is what I've learned. When you put those two together, the overlap really can accelerate your direction and the momentum that you're going to implement policy for your community. So that's what I want to really talk about. So for some of the smaller or more rural jurisdictions, if you talk to colleagues or if you are one of those, you know, that they may ask, you know, why bother with this? Why get into performance management? You know, for the finance people out there, I threw the first bullet for you. The GFOA recommends it, so that's enough, right? That we should just stop the presentation there and go on. You know, the staff recommendations, this is important, and sometimes we get lost up with our personal passions with this. Staff recommendations are based on fact and data. Policy decisions are based on values. They're judgments. Staff fact, policy value. When you cross over into the value area, you're getting into the realm of the community and the elected official. Our strength is in our fact and our recommendations based on fact. It sets us apart. Transparency. There's so much distrust and misinformation in the world right now. In any opportunity that we can have to share what we do in a transparent manner to debunk myths and you know, false things is crucial. educate and inform. Most people don't know what we do at the end of the day. My wife doesn't know what I do as a town manager on most days. So the idea that any large percentage of the community understands what we're doing as a town isn't there. So our performance management and how we report that out in our budgets and other documents are important. I've waited to about the 5th bullet to get to what most people probably think about performance management, and that's the evaluate program effectiveness and efficiency. To me as a manager, that's nice. But at the end of the day, the others are more realism for me. I'm dealing more with the policymaker and helping them keep moving in their direction. The finance officer and on down is going to look at more that program effectiveness and efficiency, as well as the department heads. Provide justification for change. Hate change. It's human nature. As I've gotten older, I realize that change is a constant. It's always going to be around us and happen. We get to decide how change affects us personally as an organization. And so the best way I've found to deal with change is to combat any miscommunications from change with data, and performance management provides that. Above all else, it builds trust. When a board sees their policy advanced, when a department head gets a resource request fulfilled, or they aren't held personally accountable as a personnel issue for something outside of their control, but they see this used as what it's intended for. It builds organizational and community trust that your local government's going to do what you intend it to do. If you've never heard John Nalbandian talk, he's a great mind when it comes to political science. He was a professor at University of Kansas. He was the mayor of Lawrence, Kansas as well. Sorry, loud cars and small communities going by. I have to deal with that. But John Nalbandian talks a lot about his concept of the bridge, and the manager, or those that work with the manager, kind of being out on that bridge. And if you look to one side on the bridge with you are your elected officials, behind them safely on the shore most of the time are your community members. If you look the other way on the bridge, you've got your department heads that are out there on the bridge with you. And then back on closer to the shore, or safely on the shore, are your staff. Sometimes you get lucky and your bridge is like the bridge in the picture with steel girders, and I don't know if I'd still go out to the middle of that particular bridge, but some people might feel safe on that. Other times it's a rope bridge with rickety planks and you're out there in the middle. So you have to kind of be aware of your bridge. In this role, the manager's role is really about communicating data and translating complex issues into a manner that the consumer understands. A lot of what we do is a foreign language to most people, and so a key role here is being able to communicate out what exactly we're doing to people who are laymen and not professionals. My limited contribution, similar to the bridge, is I often talk about management when you get into this kind of a function as the bow tie. Bow ties are just those loose, unorganized piece of decorative cloth. But when they're tied right and there's a good knot, it's kind of on the right. It can make formal wear look formal. It can add a little humor to a formal situation. No one really looks at the knot so much in the bow tie as what's the decoration on the two sides of that. So to me, it's much like the bridge where, the council's on one side and staff and department heads on the other. And the effectiveness of the bow tie is the effectiveness of the knot, the manager in between. It's the connection for those two visible sides. Anytime that knot isn't tied right, and it can come loose for a lot of different reasons, that's equivalent to a lack of communication or translation, and it can unravel your knot. I know y'all talked a little bit about strategic planning. To me, strategic planning is kind of like performance management for elected officials. It's performance management for value statements and policies. In Wendell, there was not a written established policy. Every year they met for a retreat, they talked about their policy direction, but never established a formal written policy. Getting that formally in writing is important. I use it to tie very strongly to our budget, to give the budget direction. It gives staff direction for the term of the plan. I like to use the board membership period. So if you have like a municipal election, it's 2 years to your next election. Even if it's the exact same board member, sometimes what they went through during their election process or what's going on in the world can change that sitting board's viewpoint and philosophy, even if the same people. Obviously, if you get a lot of turnover, that new board's going to want to have a chance to develop their unique policy direction. So to me, that's for a 2-year period, they're talking to development of 2 budgets where they're able to see their policies advanced within those budgets. One thing I always tell elected officials, don't approve it in the plan if you don't want it implemented. I'm really big on plan implementation and follow through. So, and they see that, they see that they put it in the budget, they put it in their strategic plan, those projects are going to get advanced and done. Hierarchy. So within a strategic plan, obviously you got your vision, goals, and then your strategic initiatives. For me in strategic initiatives, I like to break those out to management and progress, and then as strategic initiatives. Management and progress is often carryovers from the prior plan, and it might be things that we know meet the strategic goals as staff that we're committed to. We know that we've got this, we're getting this done. Strategic initiatives are the direction from the board, and they're also involve the appointed boards and the community into that process as well before the board approves the final. That also helps get both senior management and staff as well as the elected official buy-in by having both committed within that initiative process. Dedicating a retreat to kick off the process. I typically use two retreats during a year, one for budget and then one for strategic initiatives. It's either if you're developing the plan, it's the kickoff event to kind of report out the last year and get their first thoughts and additions for the new, and report out that new process. In the midterm year, it's a review of where we are, make sure there's been no COVID moment or 9/11 moment that makes us need to shift for the second year, and just kind of report out the progress and what we're going to get done and not get done. Reporting out at least quarterly. Don't let the strategic plan just be, some of the pages in a large budget document or plan on a shelf. We report it out with our monthly reports, any progress or advancement we make in strategic initiatives as staff. We tie the budget to the strategic plan. There's a specific section at the back of our strategic plan that I write out each year that ties that strategic plan to what's in this budget, whether it be the appropriated amount for the current budget year, or if it's future project considerations in the CIP. And there's also a tie between the strategic plan, and then the performance management section and departmental goals and back. The two can't be inconsistent as you develop, or you're going to be on a bridge and everybody's going to be walking away from you. For me, when I get into the more pure performance measures, I divide them much like you see in the wording here as an example: goals, work units, and performance measures. These did not exist in this jurisdiction a couple years ago. They just went out and did what they always did or what they were being told at the moment, but there wasn't any meaningful direction to work. And so, working with the department heads to write down what exactly the services are and what those core service levels are. For smaller jurisdictions like Wendell or a rural county, you may not have a whole lot of people to deal with collecting numbers. One thing that was important for us is just starting out identifying what we did, how we did it, what was the service level, and then what data were we already collecting. If for solid waste, which is an example here, we know how much was getting carried off to the dump. We understood how many tons of debris we were collecting for yard waste. So we knew how many lane miles we were servicing. So we had some data that we were already collecting, either for state reporting or for to get funding from the county for solid waste, to understand our contract obligations with GFL. So there's look for the data you're already collecting. Also, we need to understand the difference between a work unit, which is just a number measure, if you will, and a performance measure, which is more of a commitment to how much you're doing, how often, how well. And so being able to develop those performance measures, understanding that, if you don't have performance measures in place, that that can be a work in progress for a little bit. Okay, so for me, as I was learning things over time, as you can tell, I've worked with a lot of different jurisdictions of different sizes and populations, different capabilities. They're all very unique. Each performance management system kind of speaks to its own values. The relationships that I have with elected officials and staff in a town the size of Wendell are completely different on an organizational scale than what I could do in a couple thousand employee organization like a city of Fort Myers. I'm still me, but there's only so much time in the day to establish those relationships. There's a greater expectation in my influence of organizational trust and hands-on demonstration of that in a Wendell than where there's multiple layers in a larger jurisdiction. The technology we use in Wendell is an Excel spreadsheet. In a Fort Myers, we had an IT department that could develop its own technology, write its own code. Mid-size that I've worked with have bought packages and either did it off the shelf or changed them for their specific needs. One thing I feel very strongly about is you set up staff for success. Using an example for our solid waste yard services, first year I was here, the leaf truck wrecked. Did a flip, landed on its top on US 64. Luckily, the staff person was okay. No one else was injured. Just a little bit of landscaping in the median took the brunt. Truck was totaled. So in most jurisdictions I worked in, I go, okay, so you're on the backup truck. Well, we don't have a backup truck. Our policy is to sell that to save money, to help reduce the cost of the purchase. Oh, okay, so staff was not in a position to succeed. You're in the middle of leaf season, and now you have no means to provide the service. Yeah, so do you hold people personally accountable? Do you drag them down, or do you use this as an opportunity to learn, to fail forward? And so for me, accountability, which is important in any kind of performance measurement. I mean, you have to set people up for success in accountability. You have to provide them the resources to get the job done. You've got to communicate the expectation of what needs to be done. And you need to provide them the training and knowledge to do the work. And really, until you have those three things in place, you're not setting your staff up for success, and you definitely can't hold them accountable. Not meeting performance measures isn't failure, or a personnel action. It's an opportunity for trust. When the Public Works Department came in and said, you know what, we said we were going to be able to complete this amount go through the whole city every week, this percentage of the time. We're finding out in the first year that we're measuring that we're 30% under that. And our town's growing so fast, there's no way we can keep up. So they were scared at first, because in the past, they would be held accountable for that. And so using performance management as a means to look at, well, no, you haven't failed, you just weren't provided the resources to provide the service. It also connecting to the strategic plan of, hey, it's time for our evaluation of our solid waste contract, and updating that allowed an opportunity for us to evaluate outsourcing yard waste delivery. And so we moved from kind of a medieval throw it on the side of the curb to GFL doing a can pickup, much like our trash and recycling, and then just offering specialty service and special season service around that as a town. I think we've all learned this year, things change, whether it's 9/11 or COVID. And that's going to impact the data that we collect and the measure and our ability to measure staff time allocated to be able to work on that. We're behind right now this year in our data collection. Staff's been reallocated to other areas. We'll be working on getting caught up this fall now that the audit's done. The data is meant to inform. It needs to be used. One place I worked had 3 different performance management systems going, and all I heard from department heads is they basically have to take a day off and enter all their data, and then they're so worn out from that process that they never used the data after they did all this work to collect it. Well, if you're not using the data, why are you doing this? And so it's important to make sure that data is informing your budget process and is meaningful to the jurisdiction. To me, data is gold. People's internet capabilities, to me, the digital revolution and running fiber and different means of communicating, it's basically moving data, moving the gold. And so for me, data movement is much like the railroads of the 1800s or the interstates of the 1900s. And so if you don't have a plan in place to collect and evaluate data and move that data, then it's kind of like not having the train station or not having the interstate. It's a lot harder to get by in life. So to me, we're very early on in Wendell with our data collection, but that value as we go, after the first year, we had data that could talk to the next year. After 3 or 5, we can start looking at a little bit of trend analysis. If we have 3 or 5, 10 years and we have some comparatives that are collecting similar, then we can look at some service comparisons between different jurisdictions. So that data becomes more and more valuable. And finally, probably one of the harder ones to learn, that implementation equals taking risk. And in general, we're in a risk-adverse industry. But things don't get done without risk. You want to make calculated risks, but do it. Don't be scared to take the risk. I've learned more out of failure in my life, in my professional career, than anything I've learned from success. It's the lawsuits, it's the changes in jobs, it's hardship that we often grow the most. And so implement, take the risk. That's what your communities need and expect. And with that, I'm going to stop presenting. I'm probably at the time that I was allocated. And, I told Madam and this, Stephanie and Debbie that work with me that are on the call, that I for a while, and so I'll quit rambling. But I spoke with Matt a little bit before. And Matt, if I didn't touch something that you wanted me to hit, if you have questions or if anybody else has questions, I'm here for you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark. There's a question in the, and I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. Hold on, let me turn myself down. There is a question in there from Amanda that says, how are you reporting your progress? Is it Power BI or another method? Just piggyback on that, because it actually very much goes with one of my questions, which was, how in depth do you go into your reporting? So both, how do you report, but how are you reporting progress, but then also how in depth are you, like, for instance, your council, right? To make those decisions.
Okay, so in a town the size of Wendell that doesn't have a dedicated IT person, or in a rural county, I don't have a Power BI, or what was that called, Matt? Power.
Yeah, it's Power BI. Yes.
Power BI. Okay, or another method. All right. I'm not really into particular technologies or methodologies at this point. It's kind of a baby crawling. Keep it simple, and so we have Excel spreadsheets. I will do one-on-ones with my board members quarterly, and I'll talk through some strategic initiatives and plans with them, and kind of just communicate face to face. That the data that we collect is reported out, like as I mentioned, in monthly reports. It's just an Excel spreadsheet report. We only have enough staff to get into very specific service demand needs. Trying to think, probably the biggest one this past budget cycle was the yard waste, and so there we got a little bit more into the numbers. This coming year, it's dealing a little bit with our benefits and getting into those kind of cost analysis, but it's very simple at this point in Wendell.
Gotcha.
It's green light, yellow light, red light kind of coloration. Are you moving in the right direction? Are you meeting it? Are you a little short? Are you not? Is it it's got the specific numbers and goals on it for the report. For the strategic planning, it's handwritten addition and another color behind the goal, so they can just within that Excel or Word document read what's going on. the public as well. The more complex you make it, the more that the people that you need to understand it aren't going to understand. And so there's as the more you get out into the middle of that bridge as a manager, the more it is about simplifying the language to where the consumer can understand what they need to understand when they need to understand it. And that's different than when you're a budget analyst, performance measure analyst or specialist. If you're an assistant to, you're a lot more in the weeds and in the technical knowledge versus the art of how to communicate that knowledge when you get to senior management.
Thank you for that. There's another question that was put in here from Anna that says, she thanks you, and then she also says, what types of tools or methods in your past have you used for change management? You talked a little bit about, people don't like change, and you've been in various size communities. What methods have you used?
So the number one thing is listen. If you're going to have, if change is coming, the first thing you can do is listen to what people's values and what's important to them. We spend a lot of time as society talking about what our personal thoughts and ideals and values are. We don't spend a lot of time listening. And so for me, if the first thing I like to get the land and do analysis about where people are starting from. And that helps me deal with the art of crafting the message later on. So if number one way I deal with change right now is I hire Stephanie Smith from Morrisville, who's a experienced PIO, and she knows how to make words pretty a lot better than I can. And she has a lot of experience about how to develop a communications plan and prepare for different ways people see things. And so as a senior manager, how I deal with change is I build the ability and expectation in staff and trust in staff and listen to them and how we should proceed in their professional area. The other way I deal with that is I'm direct. I'm a very blunt, straight speaker. Yeah, hire Stephanie. I got you. Not allowed. Not allowed. Yeah. Only I am allowed to steal other people's key staff. I wish I had more positions because I know there's a lot of great ones out there. I see a lot of great names on this call. So there's a let people do what they need to do and change. Direct communicate. Don't be scared to tell people straight. I think sometimes giving the hard message, we're always worried about what the other person. Me personally, I want to know what's going on. I want the data. The transition in the elected officials in Wendell over the past couple of years is meaningful. They're transitioning because they have a trust. So if you're looking at some kind of change management, you need to listen to what's important and then speak truth to build trust. Don't wait to build relationships until you have the problem also. Everything puts money into the piggy bank of trust. And when you need to withdraw from it, during a hard time of change, I mean, my board is hearing from their citizens that don't like the change in how trash people like just taking their sticks and throwing them out on the side of the road and then they magically disappear. They don't want to think about how that gets paid for as the town grows from 5,000 to 20,000 in the next 6 years. So they hear the board hears that from a number of citizens, understanding that 300 people with complaints or 30 people with complaints is such a small percentage of 10,000. And building the trust that when I give them the data, that they go, okay, this is data based. It's not just how staff thinks or their opinion. You're able to show the measures, show the costs up front. Communicate. Think about who all your different consumers are and talk to them. Speak to them on their platforms in the manners and times that they need to be spoken to. And that's very different in a community like this. Very large variety.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know that everyone on the call also appreciates your insight into this. And we're going to pivot, but I wanted before we do, I just wanted to say that one of the things that's really exciting about having Mark on the call is that your perspective goes from from varying size communities through various types of strategic planning and performance evaluation strategies, et cetera. And there was one of the questions, or a couple of questions, we're talking about tools and methods that you have seen, reporting structures that you have seen. And so I hope it's okay for us to share out information in case people have questions that, depending on which community size they're in and what part of the implementation or evaluation process they're in, you can provide potential good input for them on what you've seen work and what methods you may be able to steer them away from just from your experience. I see there. Oh, and we lost Mark. Mark was like, that was so, yes.
That was a no. That was a no, Matt.
Well, Mark didn't say no, so I'm going to share his information. He had shared with me earlier that, again, that's something that he very much values. So with that being said, we're going to pivot now. And again, for those of you that are new, one of the things we heard this year was that it's really great having a regional perspective on the work that's going on. But then it's also really nice to get outside of our region to see how other communities are doing it outside of either just Triangle J or even just outside of the state, to see that there's not one size fits all. And for that, I'm personally very excited to have Lawrence Pollock join us today from Fort Collins, Colorado. Again, he's the budget director out there, and they also use budgeting for outcomes. And I know Lawrence is going to talk a little bit about that as well. But again, the way that they approach it is, I think, very different and unique compared to what a lot of us see here in North Carolina. And I think that we're going to be able to glean quite a bit from that for potentially using it within our systems here. So with that introduction, Lawrence, take it away.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Matt. I appreciate that. Couple house cleaning things ahead of time. What I'm going to show you today, I wish when we started on this journey back in 2005, we had this vision to achieve, and that's what I'm presenting today. It wasn't the case. We started out small, we added to it, we improved along the way to get to where we are now, and we think we've made really great progress, and we know we still have a long way to go. Also, on each of the slides, there will be web addresses, so feel free to jump online and be looking at some of the tools that I'll be sharing with you. And to start off, we're gonna go over two important kind of overarching concepts before we dive into the presentation. So with that, I will go ahead and share. All right. Can you see my slides? Good, thank you. All right. Yes, I'm Lawrence Pollock. I've worked for the city of Fort Collins for, wow, almost 15 years now. I can't believe it. Previously, private sector person, working with Hewlett-Packard and Agilent Technologies. And I love being able to bring some of those private sector tools and methodologies into the public sector. Not that necessarily everything is applicable to run your public or entity as a business, but there's definitely tools and methodologies that are very efficient in that way. So one of the two concepts that I want to share first is that of an outcome. You may have also heard of these with other organizations or in your own organization as focal themes. And really, these are a way for us to just categorize programs and services that we provide to the community. So we have neighborhood livability and social health, culture and recreation, economic health, environmental health, safe community, transportation and mobility, and high-performing government. And so a lot of what we do, we communicate via an outcome so that people have a point of reference of what we're talking about. The next thing I'd like to point out is what we refer to as our strategic hierarchy. And so we use this concept of a pyramid, or at the top are our key outcomes. Those are those 7 focal themes I just showed on the previous slide. Within that, specifically within our strategic plan, we have objectives that we are trying to achieve within each of those 7 outcomes. And then ultimately, what we fund in the budget is how we will resource achieving our strategic plan. Now, looking at each of these 3 areas in a little more detail, those outcomes, those 7 outcomes, those are our highest level goals, and we use them consistently in our city plan, which is a 50-year visioning document. We use it in our strategic plan, which is a 5-year view that we refresh every. We use it in our budgeting process. That's also a biennial 2-year process. When we do staff reports to council, it's in the guise of what outcome, what strategic objective. And so these have become very helpful for us from a messaging and communication perspective. And then each of those, we have metrics tied to them as well. Going down to the strategic objectives, again, those are to help us achieve those outcomes, and we will link specific metrics to each strategic objective. And then lastly, those the programs and services that we fund in the budget to resource the strategic plan, those will be directly linked to the budget, similar to how Mark had referenced, and then we have metrics tied to those as well. And we'll take all this into a much greater level of detail. And so now what I'm sharing is what we refer to as our leadership system. It is built around our vision, mission, and values. Those are not just words that we put on a shelf. They are very meaningful to our organization. We revisit those periodically and make revisions to them based on how the environment and our community may have changed. And then around that, we have, as we have grown, we're about 175,000 residents within Fort Collins. And as we have grown, we've found that systematic citywide processes can really help from an efficiency perspective. And so these 16 standard processes help define that leadership system. And so it starts with community and council at the top. And then we have our strategic planning, which drives our budgeting process, the service delivery to our community, which is made up of each individual employee. We then use measurement to see how we're doing, and then use process improvement to get back on track where we're falling short. And so this leadership system becomes an iterative process. And today we're going to focus on these 3 areas of strategic planning, budgeting, and measurement. And we'll start first with strategic planning. So our strategic plan it's part of an overall methodology that we work towards. Like I said, we have a biennial budget. And so we are very conscious that we want it all to start with the election. As Mark mentioned, one new elected official on an existing board can totally change the dynamic of that. Out of their that new council, when they're elected, they will have a retreat where they will define what they want to accomplish over the next 2 years that they're in office. That is an important component to our strategic plan, which leads into BFO, which is our budgeting process. And then that will determine the programs that we're executing in our community for the next 2 years. Now, what's challenging about this is that as we're getting into, this visual starts with 2019. Well, 2021, while we're executing the programs that we're starting back from the strategic plan in 2019 and 2020, we're going to be working on, we're going to have a new council election. We're going to be getting their new ideas, and that will be driving information for the next strategic plan. So sometimes there's a communication challenge because we're spanning so many years. But ultimately, this was very intentional because previously the council would come on and they would have to, right away, one of the most important things they're voting on is the budget and how to spend taxpayer and ratepayer dollars. There's a lot to learn as an elected official when you come on to a public sector entity. And so we felt that shifting this and giving them more time to really understand city operations helps them make better decisions for our community. So our strategic plan, like I said, is refreshed every 2 years. The department heads will help define the metrics, which I'll share in just a moment. And ultimately, these metrics will be used for reporting for performance management over the next couple of years. And we'll show you an example of what that looks like. And then one important thing for us is that metrics, you're not locked into a metric for multiple years. That's not to say that if you're underperforming on a metric, you can change it to sandbag, or you could make your target a little easier to achieve. That's not the type of changes I'm talking about. I'm talking about where a metric has increased value, either internally or from a messaging perspective. And so within our strategic planning process, our first year in 2014 with the strategic plan, we did not do this, but based on feedback, it's been a hugely advantageous aspect of our process. And that is we bring in the department heads. Let me back up. So after a core team has taken a bunch of inputs and drafted strategic objective language, then we meet by outcome and invite the service area directors, i.e. executives, and department heads who have programs and services within that outcome. And then we ask for their opinions, their thoughts on the wording. It's not a wordsmithing exercise, but we do, if there is something important to them, we will talk about that. And so in this case, what I'm showing here is the first column has the previous language from the strategic plan, the specific strategic objective. And then the middle column is how are we proposing that it changes. In our perspective, a strategic plan is probably going to be 80 to 85% consistent from cycle to cycle as you're eating off, making accomplishments in some areas, and then the new environment that you're in, there's new things you didn't know about 2 years ago. And so it's always changing. So that's helpful that the department heads get to see their words in the language of the strategic objective, which will ultimately be adopted by council. But then they are also talking about the metrics. So we say, okay, now we've agreed upon the language of the objective. How are we going to measure it? And in this case, the measures that are listed in black text, they were the ones we had used in the previous cycle. And then the conversation is, well, are these still applicable? What other metrics could we use to help evaluate the new language in a strategic objective? So that's very quickly our strategic planning process. That as soon as that plan is adopted by council, we dive right into budgeting. And within budgeting, I'm not going to go through details. Budgeting for outcomes is a priority-based budgeting where we're basically taking every program and service that's requesting funding and we're prioritizing it from 1 to N. And at some point the money runs out and there may be really great ideas below the line that there's just not resources to fund. Maybe they could be funded in a future year, but ultimately we all know we live within financial constraints. But within each budget request, there are a number of things that they have to answer, and 2 of those key ones are linking to the adopted strategic plan. So they must link to at least one strategic objective. But one of the great things that we have is we know that any program or service is not a pure play with one single benefit. And so they can link to strategic objectives in multiple outcomes to show the true value of the program or service that's being proposed. But they do have to indicate one of those strategic objectives as primary, and that one they've selected as primary will be what they have to report on for the next 2 years if their program or service is funded. Also in the budget request, they have to link to performance measures. And those are measures that we publish. I'll show you a visual of that in a moment. And they will be determined on a red, yellow, green. They'll each have a red, yellow, green status that will help inform overall progress. So these will both be incorporated into our performance reviews. And all of these narratives are posted online. So for the city of Fort Collins, we have generally about, I'd say 400, 450 different budget requests. And if you printed it all out, it's about 1,800 pages of delightful reading. But you can easily get there and see the information that you want, and I'll show that to you in a minute. So that link there is to our actual budget document. If you were diving down and seeing online, you can see the entire offer narrative, which is if you on that budget page here at this link, if you were on there and scroll down just a little bit, you'll see these 7 links here in blue, and those are, again, our outcomes. Again, we report everything, communicate via outcome. And if you clicked on neighborhood livability, you'll get a PDF report that has all of the budget requests that are being considered for the upcoming budget. There's a number of sections, but I'm going to highlight that in addition to the dollars and the headcount that needs to support this program, there is an offer summary, and that information we publish in our budget document. But there's a lot of other rich information. Like I said, it comes out to like 1,800 pages. But this is really where the value is of understanding the importance or not of a budget request. And so in this case, with what I'm showing here, neighborhood livability and social health, that's what NILSH stands for. So strategic objective 1.5 was to enhance the quality of life in neighborhoods, empower neighbors to solve problems, and foster respectful relations. But more importantly than linking to an objective, the rest of the text is how will funding this offer actually help achieve that objective. So that's one key aspect. The other I mentioned was performance metrics. And so if you scroll down as you're reading, you'll get to a section called performance metrics where you'll see a link. If you would click on that link, it will open up a new web browser page, which will take you to the data associated with that metric so that you can see its performance over time, its performance relative to a target. In this case, our target is in red. We determine a red, yellow, green status based on the proximity, based on evaluation criteria of actual performance, in this case in the blue bars, compared to red. This being graffiti removal, we want our responses to be below target. But sometimes a target's not enough, and so we'll also put stretch goals on there. We don't want to report performance of achieving a stretch goal because sometimes we know it might take years to get there, especially like in some of our climate action work. And so we don't want to always be in the red. That's very demoralizing. What we think is more important is to show incremental progress towards those longer term goals. So that's our budgeting process quickly. I realize I'm trying to pack a lot into this 20 minutes, so bear with me and hopefully we'll have an opportunity for some really good questions. So lastly, moving into measurement, this is the diagram I showed you earlier. And basically what we've done now over time, like I said, this wasn't the vision we had in 05, but where we are now is that with this hierarchy and the interconnectivity that we have within, our focus when we do organizational performance is about how are we doing in achieving the objectives in our strategic plan. And that's really shifted the focus of our performance conversations. So there's 2 ways that we report on this performance, one externally and one internally. Externally, we have what's called our community dashboard, and that has a landing page. Again, you'll see those outcomes on the left-hand side with a name, a definition of the outcome, and then shown in red, yellow, green, the performance. And so we do update this quarterly, and we publish results 6 weeks after quarter end to allow time for the data collection and analysis to be performed. On any one of those 7 outcomes, you could click on it and drill down and see the actual metrics that make up that outcome. And you'll see a definition of the metric as well as the actual performance relative to target in the most recent quarter, and then its red, yellow, green result. On any of those metrics, you can drill down 1 layer deeper and get to the actual chart that shows the performance of actuals relative to target. It will also contain an analysis statement and other contextual information like what's the city's impact on actually moving the results of that given metric. And so we look at these metrics on our community dashboard. Again, these are externally facing. They have a similar look and feel so that a viewer, as they're shifting and looking at one metric to the next, it's easier for them to follow. But that's how we say we're achieving our outcomes. The goal of this is the audience is our residents and businesses. And those 37 quarterly metrics are updated quarterly. That's why the data has to be something that does change on a quarterly basis. And we do allow our departments to change these metrics, or at least propose changes on an annual basis, and our executive team decides which ones are approved for the following year or not. And that web page is right below there. So that is how we report externally, but then we also review this performance internally. And that is done through what we call our quarterly service area reviews. Hierarchically, we have our city manager. The city manager's direct reports all executives. We refer to them as service area directors. Any service area director is basically in charge of a group of related departments. And so the audience for these reviews is with the city manager, the deputy city managers, and our CFO. It's specific to a service area, so it's going to have that director and their department heads. And there's 4 standing agenda items, one of which is what is the performance on our community dashboard. They have a slightly different view that they look at. There's a screenshot there for you so that you can see performance over the last few cycles. But this methodology, or having the review in this format, allows for a dedicated conversation of the executive and the department heads who are directly related to the performance of these metrics that we report on externally. I will tell you, we started these reviews back in 2014, and we failed. We failed miserably a few different times. And in each of those, we are very much about learning from our mistakes. These were expensive meetings that we were having, and they weren't working for everybody. And so it took a number of changes. And what came out of these inputs was, one, let's focus on this external reporting of our community dashboard through this QSAR process. And then we're going to focus on the strategic plan, but we do that internally. And we do that through a method that we call strategy maps. And that map means metrics, analysis, and performance. And so the participants of this are the entire executive team. So they meet on a weekly basis and 1 meeting a month. This is a standing agenda item. And so in addition to the entire executive team, these meetings are by outcome. And so any department heads associated with programs or the metrics that have been linked to the strategic plan, they're at the table in the discussion. It's not like a gotcha review. The thing about being at the table is so that, and physically pre-COVID, we really were all around a big table so that everyone was part of a dialogue. It wasn't an us versus them kind of perspective. And because of that, as well as some other things we've done around metrics, which I'll share shortly, they've really developed into robust discussions within the organization and opportunities for people to help each other out with program and service delivery. Monthly meetings. Over the period of a quarter, we will cover all 7 of our outcomes. And so over that quarter, we're covering about 170 different metrics approximately, as well as every program and service that is funded in the budget. And now that we've been doing this for about 3 years, over a quarter, it takes 5 to 6 hours for these discussions to cover all 7 outcomes. So each strategic objective so these review meetings, again, they're by outcome. And then we're going to go within that outcome, we're going to go objective by objective, and we're reviewing the performance of achieving the strategic objective. We do that through 2 lenses. First are the performance metrics that I mentioned earlier that the department heads were involved with determining when we're building the strategic plan. Ideally, we have 3 to 4 metrics per strategic objective. And then we'll also look at it from the initiatives perspective, what was funded in the budget. We have gotten significant department buy-in because of what we've asked them to specifically do. So the first 2 bullet points under here, under the department head. So as I mentioned earlier, they can see their words in the strategic objective. So it's not something that came down from on high. They were part of its creation. And they also said, how are we going to measure this? Some of it times it's their own measures. And so they have a direct buy-in because of the decisions they made to help develop that strategic plan. And then from a budgeting perspective, as I showed you in the budget request, they have to link to a strategic objective, indicate how they're going to achieve that, and they've got metrics that speak about the performance of their own program or service. Again, they can change metrics at any time as long as it's not sandbagging, but the combination of all of these has really helped with the buy-in at this level. And although I will say that the level between the department heads and frontline workers, that is a really challenging level of management to crack. Sometimes we'll refer to that as the clay layer. Like if you think about cascading communications, and sometimes they only go so far, right? It kind of gets stuck there, right? Well, our idea of getting the department heads buy-in is that they have direct control over everything that goes on in that department. What's important to the department head should be important for everyone within that department, and so that their buy-in for us is really, really critical. And then something I'll show you in a minute here is that if anything is underperforming in these, i.e. it's got a red or yellow status, in addition to the analysis statement, they have to talk about what the action plan is to get back on track. And in the words of our city manager, Darren Atterbury, we use metrics as a flashlight and not a hammer. For us, this is hugely important. I believe that there is a natural fear people have that metrics are going to be a reflection on them personally. And so because of that, we have not tied metrics to individual employee evaluations. Instead, we are trying to use metrics as a way to highlight opportunities for us to improve our performance. So just quickly, here are two examples of our strategy maps. In this case is the strategic objective at the top, Econ 3.4, to foster infill and redevelopment that enhances the community. Here are two metrics that are directly linked to that strategic plan. So it lists the metric, its frequency, the analysis statement. Notice that the second one, Econ 3 of commercial vacancy rates, is underperforming, so it had to have an action plan associated with it. And then the charts and graphs of the data are also showed with those. So that's one lens. The second lens is what we funded in the budget and said, these programs and services are going to help with this strategic objective. Again, similar look and feel, the initiatives listed down the left, and that middle one having an action plan because it is underperforming. And quickly, I'd like to show you how we've used this in practice. So again, this is our leadership system. Through measurement, we became aware that two safety metrics, those being DART and TRIR, so DART being days away, restricted or transferred if an employee gets hurt. And then TRIR is the total recordable incident. Those safety metrics, we were doing horribly. We were like twice industry benchmarks at a national level. And we said, that's not acceptable. So we evaluated what we do to improve performance of that. That directly led into an objective because it was citywide. And so we had a strategic objective approved in the plan focused on safety. Then there were budget requests that were funded to support the strategic objective. Ultimately, we go out and we're implementing those programs and services. Ultimately, another thing that we added in here, the cultural aspect of safety, was that on individual goal cards, there was a statement about safety and how each individual could contribute to that. And then in the end, we measure again and say, have we done better, right? Or have our improvements been enough? And so I'll show you some graphs. This was the data that we had. You can see the blue bars way above our targets. And then in green was the public sector entity. So we were, horrible. And once we started to focus on this, notice how those blue bars of our actual DART and TRIR rates really dropped to the point so that we said, you know what, we can lower our target and make our target more aggressive to drive continual performance. And notice we still weren't at the industry benchmark, but we had made significant progress. And so this is an example of how this was put into practice for us. And so just some closing thoughts. There's no best way to do this, and it really depends on your organization. What's the culture of your organization and the people who make it up? Because it's got to work for that culture. In Fort Collins, I mentioned the concept of the flashlight, and that really enables us to focus on continual improvement as opposed to who's getting in trouble for that performance. I mentioned the robustness of the discussions that we have at the executive level talking about organizational performance now. And that's when the city manager is not there. The conversations are still going. They're still just as robust. And so if you don't have either a strategic plan or you don't have a structure, a systematic way to measure performance, I'd ask you to consider this motto. Just get started. Know it's not going to be perfect, and then make it better through continual improvement. Another thing I say is be patient. This stuff takes time. Before I started working with the city, I was talking with someone I was networking with in the city, and they used this statement of one of their biggest frustrations was what they referred to as the glacial speed of government. And so I think we can probably all resonate to that in some aspects. But it's going to take time, especially because it's not going to be perfect right away. And so just make it better. Like I said, I wish we had this vision of where we were going 15 years ago. We didn't. But through continual improvement and knowing that we've got to work hard and learn and get feedback, that's how it's helped us get to where we are now, knowing we still have a long way of where we're going. And lastly, I would say, please do reach out. I'm a total nerd in this space. I love to talk about this stuff and to learn from others. And that's really what it's all about, I think. So please, I don't say this frivolously, but drop me an email, pick up the phone, and let's chat. Because just like if you have questions that I may be able to answer, I'm going to bet I'm going to learn things from you as well. So thank you for your time today, and that will open up for questions.
Thanks, Lawrence, so much for that presentation. We do have a question that's come in from Kimberly. She says that individual goals are shown in your leadership system. So how does this work if individual performance isn't tied to the strategic plan?
So that's a great question. The individual performance, we used to have a really intense process for it, which everyone complained about. And one of the things that Mark mentioned that I definitely resonate to is that sometimes less is more. And so now instead of saying, well, how did you do on this specific thing and this specific thing, we rate performance from a simple 2 matrix. What were the behaviors and what were your results? And we're ultimately trying to move people to have great behaviors and great results. Because if you only have one, you're really not maximizing performance. And so we do it kind of holistically, and not that a person A, if you're responsible for the performance of these 3 metrics, and that's how we're going to evaluate you. Now, that said, if there was an area that was underperforming consistently and they weren't working on their action plans and trying harder if performance wasn't improving, that's a different story. That becomes a performance management issue of the employee as opposed to the structure that we've had. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lawrence. While we wait to see if any more questions come in, you talk about the external side of the evaluation process. Putting it up in a community dashboard so that the community can, in many ways hold you all accountable. And some communities are doing that more than others. I see a trend in this where more and more are trying to put that information out there. Since y'all have been doing it for a little while, have you had people show up to, council meetings? Have people reference it? What has been the result of putting this out there to the community?
So that's a great question. We had council after a few years say, well, when are we going to get to discuss this? Like, okay, well, that's good. We tried to have what we called, as part of our budget process, kind of a performance review. We're going to spend an hour and talk about city performance. We failed. We actually ended that topic in cycle because people were glazing over. It was a bad council meeting. They're like, all right, we're going to come back. We're going to do something different. And so what we've now implemented is that of those 37 metrics, there are 24 that we say we have a high impact on that. Unemployment rate, we don't have a high impact on unemployment rate. It's important for our community and businesses, so that's why we include it. But of those 37, there's 24. And so now we've implemented a process where one council meeting a month, one of those dashboard metrics is discussed in a staff report, and then council can ask questions about it. So over a 2-year period, every one of those high impact metrics is getting visibility in council dialogue. And then community members may mention it depending on the topics that come up, if it's a topic related to something that we're also measuring. But the implementation of the staff reports has helped create that connectivity between that reporting and then how it is of interest to council.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know if others on the call have heard about that. I have not heard that kind of approach before, and that's a really interesting idea to make sure that you're keeping council in the loop through those types of reports and focusing, and Mark talked about it as well, focusing the communication to the audience in which you're trying to communicate to. Speaking of Mark, he has a question in here. He says, awesome job. Perfect on the department inclusion on the plan development. Are there any ideas on permeating the quote unquote clay layer? What is working and what is not?
So when we ask for those department head inputs, we're an organization where if we want to go down a rabbit hole, we're really good at that. We can go really far down that. And so when we're asking for those inputs from department heads, we tell them, don't call a meeting, right? Don't ask for what these things are. What we want to know is you're a department head. You're responsible for all the programs and services that are operating in your department. Keeps you up at night. What are the 3 to 5 things, either issues or opportunities over the next 5 years that really concern you or excite you? That's the feedback we're looking for. And so we keep it at that higher level to help us stay out of the weeds. And that helps us, and even with that, we ask about, for 2 to 3 ideas per department head. Sometimes it's more, but ultimately that's over 100 different inputs are coming. And so we don't want to go deeper into the organization for the ideas on the strategic plan, because the strategic plan is supposed to be at a higher level on strategy. But to answer your question about how to permeate that clay layer, Mark, we don't have that nut cracked. And if any of you do, I'm all ears.
Fantastic. Well, just looking at the time, I do have one final question in here. And sorry, Anna, I skipped over you by accident with it coming up here. But Anna says, it sounds like culture and behavior/results is very mature. How have you taught your team on how to create measurements and continuous improvement?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so I think what the question is, and Anna, jump in here if I'm butchering your question here, but what it sounds like to me is that it sounds like a lot of what's going on within your organization. I heard a little bit with Mark as well. It's around the culture, around setting setting results and behavior in a mature culture. How have you taught your team to create measures and to move towards continuous improvement? How have you created that type of culture in your organization? And I kind of hear that in a similar way around, moving from like blaming people. Well, like people see, if, we've heard this before, human psychology, you see red and you're below plan, you want to like fudge the numbers to make yourself go to yellow. You want to look slightly better or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
How have you sown those seeds for them to be honest and forward in those type of approaches towards continuous improvement and performance measurement?
So I'll answer that in 2 ways. One, it comes from the top. That's the tone and tenor that the city manager is communicating, and that's helpful. We're really fortunate in Fort Collins that Darren Atterbury has been with us as city manager for over 15 years. That's not the norm, as you all know. So we've also been able to have consistency in that cultural aspect. So that is we're a benefit of that. But from what we have done from a metrics perspective, is like people will say, well, what do I measure? Like, I don't care what you measure. What you measure should be important for you. It should be valuable. We'll say, well, what's that mean? Well, what I mean by that is take your measure when you get the data performance, are you going to do anything with it? Like, that's interesting. Put it on a shelf. That's not a valuable metric. Stop measuring that immediately, right? But the data that you're going to say, wow, we've got to change something. We have to do something here. And the fact that we allow the determination of the metrics are at the department level, the ownership for performance of those is at the department level, and they can make an argument for modifying those metrics. Again, not for sandbagging because you weren't making results, but you've improved the metric. And I'll tell you, here's a case in point, which is just so fascinating to me. So environmental health, waste, keeping waste out of the landfill is one of our metrics. And we had been performing really well historically. As we peeled back the onion to different types of material going and other things, we found that things were not as rosy as we thought. And so they brought to these strategy map meetings 3 measures, brand new measures that were all underperforming. The city manager's there, right? My service area director. That in some organizations could be career suicide. But in our organization, they had the confidence of being able to bring that data forward. And it was a very robust discussion that the data had allowed us to actually have a better picture. Now we know we're not performing where we were. How do we get better? What do we need to do? And that was really, it gave me goosebumps when that happened.
Yeah, I think most of us in this room strive for that type of conversation and that type of trust, especially when it comes to data-driven decision making. So I appreciate you sharing that example. I want to go ahead and be mindful of time. I want to thank you, Lawrence, for sharing your perspective and your input with us, and for also providing your information out there. As Elena said, she's going to make sure that your contact information, as well as Mark's, I say that Mark is back with us. Sorry about that, Mark. I know you were immediately about to say, yes, everybody email me right now with your questions before we lost you. But I just want to make sure that we get that out there for you all as well. So with that being said, I ask that we go ahead and pivot to the next part. Lawrence and Mark, you're more than welcome to stay on. We're going to talk about 2 other things I think are really exciting. We're going to get an update on the Regional Academy, which actually we have quite a bit just to let you all in on. And then we're going to talk about where we're at currently with the regional organization, and we actually have an ask for you all that are on the call. So for that, I'm going to go ahead. Let's go ahead and jump into the Academy first, Elena, if that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for an update.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't actually provide an introduction of myself at the beginning of the meeting. For those of you who don't know me, I work with TJ Cog. So that is why I'm able to give this update so well. So if you have been able to see this morning, we released news about the Regional Innovation Academy. Some of you had probably been involved in conversations about it for, I don't know how long now, maybe a year or a little less than a year. There's been conversations going on with this group. And just to give some background on why TJ Cog thinks this is so important, and I will make sure to pass along, there's a whole task force that several of those individuals are on the call, so I want to make sure they have time to share. But it's really important, I think, for those of you who have been in this group for a long time. It definitely, and I apologize, I have a dog running around with a bone right now, but this meeting started with a lot of the largest communities, right? Because strategy and innovation is often something that is really only accessible in theory to bigger communities that have time to dedicate to that. And so one of the things that TJ Cog has been working to focus on for a long time is making sure that all of our communities, we have 44 local governments that we represent, that all of them feel like they can have a part in that conversation and have access to learning in platforms like this, and then in more specific things like the Academy, getting actual access to the tools. So Matt, jump in if I'm repeating myself, because I don't know how much this group all knows, but basically the Academy, we've just launched applications for this. So this is a pilot year. So everything is kind of a learning as we go, which is, I guess, the way innovation works anyway, so it's perfect. We're going to have a cohort that is starting in January of 2021, going through 6 courses that are all focused on innovation, kind of the process of innovation. So it's going to start with an introduction to creative design. It'll have a class on defining and measuring outcomes. And all 6 courses were designed based on a survey that went out a couple months ago to all of your local governments. So identifying what the biggest gaps were. And so what we want to talk about today is most importantly that we're looking for some instructors for this academy. So what's important about this academy is that it's really meant to make innovation accessible, but it's also meant to pool resources. So some of our bigger communities already teach some of the classes that will be in this academy. They do it in their own local governments. And so we're really hoping to leverage those resources that already exist to make it kind of a seamless process. So there's 6 courses. We've already heard from a couple of communities that are interested in teaching one of them, but we do want to make sure that we pull in anyone who's interested in being part of that process. What am I missing, Matt? And Kanisha and Julie, because I think there's more on the call as well.
Well, yeah, I'll just jump in real quick and say, well, first of all, Elaine, I think that was a great update for us. And just speaking for myself, I mean, it's incredibly exciting what's going to be coming up here and what the plan is. And so if you have any ideas for people who could be teaching those courses, you can put them in the chat, or you can reach out to Elena specifically, and she'll make sure to share it with the task force. And I just want to do just real quick a quick shout out to this concept. I mean, the idea that more and more, and I'm going to get on my soapbox just real quick, is that Triangle JCOG is trying to find it's working to assist communities of all different sizes, all different types of community needs, etc. And there, if anybody knows me, well enough, I like talking about wicked problems. And and we're in many ways there are many issues that we all are facing that are going to take innovative approaches that do these problems do not see boundaries, they do not see jurisdictional lines, and so personally I'm excited to kick this off and to and to see how it grows. I mean, in and of itself, it's kind of prototyping itself because we know that this is going to take continual improvement, but the end result, I think, is going to be very strong for the community at large. And so if you are excited about that concept, if you're excited about being a part of it, teaching it, putting in, submitting applications for it, sending it to other communities, by all means, we're only as successful as the group that is with us. And I'm ready, we're ready to get going. So with that, I'm going to get off my soapbox now and turn it over to somebody else.
I was just going to say a couple things that came up at Wake County so far, where there were some, I think, great internal questions, and a few of them I think we've added to some FAQs for the applications, but have a kind of broader context. And one was, as Wake County and the place that has their own innovation team, there was a question from like the manager's office about like, well, are we like allowed to participate, or is this for other people and we're like hogging spots if we do participate since we're already having our own program? And so we made sure to like clarify, no, it's for everyone. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that it is for places, all of those places, because one of the things that we, I think, have noticed in Wake County is that even if we do our own innovation training, that's still nested within the county, right? So part of the benefit of this program is whether or not you have your own innovation program, is it allows you to work regionally and think regionally and meet people that are not just from your same organization. And I think those things will actually be a huge benefit that we can't get if we're just solely running our own internal programs.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Julie. I think there's, part of it is the value of all the different communities coming together, which is, I think TJCOG would say that's the value for every type of topic that you all work on, because that's our motto, right? But I think also, at least with this pilot year, it is a free program. So If that can last long term, that's great because it does make it accessible to every type of community that wants to be in the room, which I think is really important. So we're just very excited about this. We've got some messages coming in from Anna. Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is definitely, we keep saying it's a pilot. It's a pilot because as we go, it will probably grow and we'll be able to add more courses or teachers like, you know, Anna is already volunteering, and I know Chapel Hill has volunteered their services as well. So there's 6 courses specifically in this cohort in the spring, but I think that could grow and change as we find more expertise in the region, I would think. So I guess the couple action, I don't know if there's anything else anyone else wants to say. The few action items probably are, 1, if you're interested in teaching, or if you think your local government has expertise, let us know. If you're hearing like frequently asked questions from your community about the academy, let myself, Matt, Julie, Kanisha know, and we'll help answer them for you. Apply if you want to participate or nominate someone. We have sent out the request specifically to the managers and human resource staff as well. So we really are trying to target nominations, but. Anything I'm missing, Matt?
No, I think that's great. And unfortunately, I was actually reading some of the messages, so I may be repeating exactly what you just said. But but as Elena actually said, I do know she said earlier that, you know, the emails have gone out. If you have questions, have issues, you can reach out to her. You can reach out to us. If you have suggestions as well, again, all of this is open. And we want to make sure that if you want to be involved in any way, like I said, we're happy to bring you in. But the problem is trying to get out, because once you're in, I mean, like, you're just going to love it so much. You don't need to try to get out. Just try.
Yeah, don't volunteer unless you really want to.
The other thing,
open arms.
The other thing that came up at the county, and this might be a question for other people, is who are the right people for this? And I think what we're saying, and I think believe, is that the people who participate don't have to be in innovation. Obviously, they don't have to be in a manager or supervisor role necessarily. They just have to be people that are very open-minded, want to learn how to like make change, have ideas, like to test stuff out. So I don't think that there's a specific role of person. It's more about like mindset.
Absolutely. Unless there's anything else, I think we should go to a quick little pivot here to the next item. And then I want to try to leave, again, about 15 minutes or so for us just to open the floor up. I know that I would love to hear how things are going in your communities, if you have questions, issues, or successes you would like to share. But before we get to that, let's just get a quick update on the regional consultation. Again, if Elena, can you give us just a quick recap of what that is and where we're currently at?
Yep. So the regional consultation effort is another sort of making innovation accessible kind of program. So we did a pilot with the town of Cameron, which, for those of you who don't know where Cameron is, it's in Moore County. It's about 300 people. And Michael Davis from Durham County and Ray Buckley from Chapel Hill actually worked kind of, I guess, pro bono, but really just out of interest on a strategic plan document for the town of Cameron, because they were really struggling. And so we're looking, that was kind of the test run. We're looking to expand that, right? So staff members from larger communities or mid-sized communities who have time and interest in assisting smaller communities with strategy and innovation projects can be provided to some of our smaller communities. So at this point, we're actually in the process of still identifying local governments that are really small that are interested in this. A lot of them obviously are inundated with COVID-related things, so it's really hard to think about innovation right now. But if you know of any local governments that you think are really small, so Cameron is 300 people, it could be a little bit bigger than that, but small, looking to shape their strategy, need budget assistance or guidance, not finance, but budgetary strategic planning, let us know, and we'll be launching some more pilots of that. So that's consultation at this point.
Yeah, and thank you a lot, Elena. And just to give you all a quick heads up, if you've taking a sneak peek at what's coming up later on in the year. I believe it's our last session this year, May 13th. We're hoping to talk specifically about smaller communities and the big ideas around those. And the regional consultation is kind of the lead. And for that, about, again, talking about that regional approach to helping communities in our area be successful or more successful. And then we're also working on a couple of great speakers to come in there and to share their perspective on that kind of impact that smaller communities can have on the larger environment around them. And so more to come on that. I mean, I'm like this close to announcing at least one of the speakers, but I just haven't gotten it on the email back saying yes, you're on the calendar. So that'll be soon.
We'll keep everyone on the edge of their seats on that one.
Yes. Oh yeah. Trust me, you'll be excited. So on that note, we have about 20 minutes left, and I wanted to open up the floor. I'm going to put you all on the spot and say if you're in a position that you want to turn on your camera, so it's not just, I think it's just me, Elena, and Julie right now that are taking the risk of being seen. You can't see my apartment, so that's why you sitting really behind you because you don't want to. But on that note, I would love to hear from you all. I'd love to hear what's going on, any issues going on in your area, anything you'd like to throw out to the group. This is your time. And just for fun, to let you all know that I was told very specifically that that we needed time at the end of these meetings to have robust conversations. So now I'm starting to wonder.
Well, I'll jump in while everyone's really quiet. I actually just forgot an update that I wanted to provide about the Academy. So just folks know the interest level. This is way back to our earlier agenda item. But I will note, and the task force doesn't know this yet, but we are going to have a lot more applications than we will spots in the cohort, which I think just speaks to the interest in this program, which is very exciting. So we already have applications from all 7 of our counties and about 15 communities, and that's within like 10 hours. So thumbs up to everyone who's been working on this, but also just this is definitely going to be something that grows. So ideas and feedback and input are all welcome as we make sure that this is worth all the attention that it's getting. So.
Thank you for that clarification there, Elena. I'm curious. I want to throw a question out there to you all, because Elena's even mentioned as well. Communities are, it's hard to talk about innovation, strategy, et cetera, around during COVID because you're so focused on day to day. Yet there's been a lot of conversation that these are the times where you need to be the most strategic. You need to be the most focused. And I just didn't know it. Does anyone out there have any areas where they've either been struggling with trying to keep strategy on the rails during COVID? Any success stories, anything that you can provide? Because I think that would really be helpful for other communities on the call. Oh, hey, Mark, go ahead. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
So I think where we've been noticing challenges tend to be when our strategic initiatives deal with like growing large group activities like special events. Also, talk about our Parks and Rec department. We basically need to reinvent our performance measures. They've been extremely creative in the adapting programs to meet health protocol, but our measures aren't going to capture that at all. It's just going to measure how they're grossly underperforming in growing program and activities. So, right now we're, it's kudos to staff on the innovation side, but management, finance is a little slow on adapting their performance measures.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm wondering, I'm seeing who else is on. I'm curious, Natalie. I don't know if you're still there, and I believe you're in Durham. I was curious if you had anything to share, what you all are doing, because I don't know about others, but I look at Durham quite a bit to see what you all are doing and see if I can borrow anything, or you professionally steal. You right? Is that what we do? And you're muted, by the way, Natalie.
I just came back from leave, and so I'm slowly getting acclimated back to what's been happening the past few months. But is the question on innovation, what we've been doing in that area?
Well, I just didn't know if you could. Welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
So not to put you on the spot, I didn't mean to. I apologize. I was just curious if you had heard anything about how you all have had to pivot as well during COVID. Like Mark was talking about looking at measures with parks, and like how have you all had to pivot, and if so, any feedback on how that's been going?
So I was part of the budget side on the city, kind of working with departments to understand what they're all doing. And so like way back in March, every department was pretty much doing their own thing, and there was no centralized way of knowing what it was. And so the effort I was involved with was breaking up as a budget staff to understand what they're doing, and then listen to the service providers in what they're seeing, and whether some services should be stopped, should be revved back to normal, or should be re-engineered in some way to meet the needs of COVID-19. And all that was collected and given to executive teams to make final decisions or follow-up questions with. And that has been an effort that still continues to go on, but is now merging with like an effort to reimagine services. So not just like a reaction to what COVID-19 is doing, but being more intentional in, now that we've seen yard waste no longer be offered each week and do it every other week, is that something that we can continue so that, our community, it wouldn't be as expensive to do or whatnot. And just like listening in and seeing how maybe some services that we provided that were of the normal way, are there other ways to do that using a more racial equity lens to respond to the current climate? So all of those are conversations that's happening, and it's like a lot of back and forth with departments. I don't know if that makes sense. That's one.
Awesome. And thank you for sharing that. That was very interesting. And thank you for being able to pivot really fast when I called call you out.
My pleasure, Matt.
I'm sorry. Hey, Amanda. Bye, Amanda.
So I was just going to say, if you participate in the benchmarking program, I'm super excited to see how we are going to kind of account for different things like our drop in participation for parks and recreation, and some of those different factors, and then our cost. And then we did for like public works and fleet and some of our utilities, we had guys rotating weeks. So when we're looking at like our actual billable hours, so we had like one crew working 1 week, and then they were off kind of the next week, and the second crew coming in, so that way basically not everybody was exposed. I don't know how many people did that. So when we're kind of looking at some of our data, it's really interesting to see, and I don't know how we're going to account for that, or if it's just going to literally be an asterisk that says COVID-19. But kind of like how are we measuring our performance, because we're seeing a drastic dip. So like for fleet, you're looking at our billable hours, that's substantially less because our vehicles weren't being driven. We had a lot of staff that wasn't there, that everybody got sent home if they could work from home. So we had vehicles not being driven. A lot of stuff was put on standstill, and then easy girl. And so how that kind of impacts what we're going to show with our trends. So, I mean, is anybody else outside of like asterisking, or are you going to try to like go in and do kind of adjustment factors or anything, or is it just like an asterisk for COVID?
That's a good question. At least for me, I mean, as of right now, I'd be curious to see, because you mentioned earlier about benchmarking. And oh, before I forget, for those of you who are on the call, Amanda's from the town of Apex, correct? Okay, just want to make sure that in case anybody has questions there, then they can find you. I mean, I think that, the asterisk idea is interesting, but it's also be interesting to make sure that you're then benchmarking against other metrics that could be influenced by COVID with other communities, right? So it's like if you're talking about fleet, for instance, and measures around that, there may be an asterisk put on there internally for you all if you're comparing it to other years, but whether or not when you're benchmarking against, the town of Cary and what they're doing, whether or not that would be more one-to-one because you're going through similar challenges. Now, the approach to how you affect that service or you implement that service will be different. So there may be a lot more descriptive and like qualitative elements to that. But I'd be curious to know whether or not you would be able to do more Apple one-to-one. And Mark jumped in because I think Mark's like, Matt, you are way off the rails on this.
No, you're right on the rail, man. I wanted to underline that. Like Amanda's talking about how they went to every other week, and so their fleet's down. But we actually shifted to individuals in vehicles in a smaller community, so our fleet expenses are up because all of our vehicles are being operated all the time, while some backups would be sent on the side. So different communities solving COVID in different ways mean our performance measures may be different fruits.
And see, from my perspective, I think that would be really interesting because then you could be able to glean from each other potentially where those resource allocation shifts could happen for longer term. And back to Natalie's point, she talked about the idea of like whether or not these short-term things may be also longer-term effects. Being able to have those type of benchmarks, you all using completely different approaches, could highlight potentially what kind of like in the detailed changes could happen for that long-term service delivery over time for another community. Anyways, anybody else like to chime in on this? All right. Well, and with that being said, I won't hold you all any longer. Oh, Monica. Sorry, Monica. It said just a minute ago you mentioned that it could result in innovation that was never thought about in the past, and I absolutely agree. And I see head nodding as well. That's the benefit as well of this group. So thank you so much for bringing that in. And Elena, you're absolutely right. While we wrap up here. The next meeting, let me just pull it up here real quick, is going to be in February, on February 11th, again from 2 to 4, it'd be a Thursday, and it's going to be on predictive analytics. And right now we're we're still finalizing who our speakers are going to be. Again, we're going to get a regional approach, and we're going to get an outside of the region perspective as well. And so from that, it'll be a lot of fun to chat with you all again. So Elena, would you like to close us out?
I can. I don't have many final words. Yeah, so see everyone in February. Let the task force know if you have any questions on the academy, and have a good rest of your Thursday.
Thank you all. Have you stopped the recording, by the way, Elena?
Yes, I'm going to stop that right now. How do I turn it off?